Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly astonishing yet profoundly grim journey deep into the heart of ancient China, a civilization famed for its emperors, its philosophies, and its monumental achievements. But we're not focusing on the grandiosity of the Qin dynasty's unification. Instead, we're pulling back the veil to uncover what sucked about being a craftsman for the Terracotta Army. Forget artistic freedom and celebrated masterpieces. You're about to discover a grim reality where your immense skill was brutally exploited, your life consumed by relentless labor, and your ultimate fate inextricably linked to the terrifying obsession of the first emperor. This wasn't a glamorous artistic endeavor. It was an arduous, dangerous, and often soul-crushing task that broke bodies and silenced artists, all for a colossal, lifeless army destined for eternity. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the first month working on the Terracotta Army without longing for a simple, less precise, and far less deadly life in a quiet village. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in a vast, sprawling construction site near the ancient Chinese capital of Xianyang. Sometime during the reign of Qin Shi Huang, 221-210 BCE, the first emperor of a unified China, the air is thick with the dust of clay, the acrid smell of wood smoke from kilns, and the pervasive tang of sweat and fear. You are a skilled craftsman, perhaps a sculptor, a potter, a painter, or a laborer with an eye for detail, born into a family with generations of artistic or artisanal talent. Normally, your skills would bring you respect, perhaps even a comfortable livelihood, allowing you to create beautiful ceramics or everyday tools for local lords or wealthy merchants. But today, your destiny has been violently rerouted. You have been chosen. And with that imperial decree, your nightmare truly begins. The reasons why a craftsman, particularly one of your caliber, would find yourself laboring on the Terracotta Army project were often grim and inescapable. This wasn't a choice driven by personal ambition or a desire for artistic recognition. It was a matter of forced service, where your very skill became a tool of imperial coercion, binding you to a colossal, terrifying project. Conscription, the most common method. The Qin dynasty, famous for its ruthless efficiency and centralized power, levied massive conscript labor for its grand projects. As a skilled artisan, you were a valuable resource to the state. Officials would scour the empire, identifying talented individuals and forcibly recruiting them, often regardless of their existing family obligations, health, or personal desires. Imagine being torn from your home, your family's cries fading into the dust as you are marched, perhaps in chains, towards the distant construction site. Punishment? Some craftsmen might have been condemned criminals or individuals who fell afoul of the law or powerful officials instead of execution or simple imprisonment. Their sentence might be commuted to forced labor on the emperor's grand projects, including the mausoleum. For them, working on the Terracotta Army was a slow, agonizing form of death sentence, a punishment designed to extract every last ounce of their skill and life. Imperial workshop servitude. If you were born into a family of artisans traditionally serving the imperial court, your skills were inherited, and so was your obligation. You might already be part of a vast imperial workshop system, and your assignment to the Terracotta Army would be a direct command from your superiors, an unquestionable duty to the Son of Heaven. Regardless of how you arrived, your life as a craftsman on this project was defined by an absolute loss of personal autonomy. Your skills, once a source of pride and livelihood, were now entirely dedicated to the emperor's posthumous army. You could not refuse. You could not leave. And you could not deviate from the imperial vision. Your craft was no longer your own. It belonged to the Qin state, a disposable resource in a monumental undertaking. It truly sucked to have your artistic talent become your prison. The purpose of the Terracotta Army was chilling in its grandeur. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, was obsessed with immortality and ensuring his continued power in the afterlife. He envisioned a subterranean empire, complete with a vast, loyal army to protect him. The Terracotta Army was a literal, life-sized replica of his imperial guard, designed to accompany him into the spirit world. For you, the craftsman. This meant creating not just beautiful statues, but thousands upon thousands of soldiers, each with a unique face, yet all serving a singular, eternal purpose. Your artistry was meant to bring these clay figures to life, ironically. As your own life was slowly extinguished, the scale of the project was incomprehensible. Estimates suggest the Terracotta Army consists of over 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, all meticulously crafted from terracotta. This required an immense workforce of not only common laborers who worked on the mausoleum complex itself, which was far larger, but also tens of thousands of specialized artisans like yourself, working for decades. The project began shortly after Qin Shi Huang ascended the throne and continued throughout his reign. Lasting for over 30 years, your entire adult life could be consumed by this single, monstrous project. The immediate consequence for your family, if you had one, was catastrophic. Your absence meant fewer hands to work the land, threatening their very survival. They would face increased taxes, the grim prospect of starvation, and the agonizing uncertainty of whether you would ever return from the distant construction site. Many families simply collapsed under the immense strain, leaving behind a trail of broken homes and orphaned children, a silent, unacknowledged cost of the emperor's obsession. One common misconception is that the Terracotta Army was built entirely by slaves. While slaves and condemned criminals certainly formed a significant portion of the labor force for the wider mausoleum complex, which encompassed vast underground palaces and treasures, the actual craftsmen who sculpted and assembled the highly detailed terracotta figures were often skilled artisans, some of whom may have been conscripted freemen or artisans from imperial workshops. They were undoubtedly subjected to harsh conditions and brutal discipline, effectively making them state property, but their specialized skills made them distinct from common laborers. Historians still meticulously study the marks and signatures found on the terracotta figures to identify workshops and individual craftsmen, providing crucial insights into the organization and labor practices of this colossal project, often finding evidence of highly organized, but still coercive, labor. Furthermore, the very nature of your craft, which demanded incredible precision and artistic talent, ironically condemned you to a particularly grueling fate. While other conscripts might haul earth or break rocks, your work required constant mental focus, fine motor skills, and an artistic eye, often in conditions ill-suited for such detailed work. This added a layer of unique frustration to your servitude, as your talents were being exploited for a purpose that was both grand and profoundly dehumanizing. The entire project was shrouded in immense secrecy. The emperor's mausoleum complex was a state secret, designed to remain hidden until his death. This secrecy extended to the workers. You were constantly monitored, confined to the construction site, and forbidden from revealing any details about the scale or nature of your work. This physical and informational isolation further separated you from the outside world, immersing you completely in the Emperor's terrifying, posthumous vision. This perpetual state of vigilance and enforced silence added another layer of psychological pressure to your already brutal existence, ensuring that your suffering remained hidden from the world. So, your initiation into the life of a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was a terrifying descent into forced service. Your unique skills became a tool of imperial coercion, binding you to a colossal project of unprecedented scale. This brutal recruitment, this systematic erasure of your personal freedom, and this intimate connection to the Emperor's terrifying obsession with the afterlife were the first, and perhaps most foundational, aspects of what sucked about being a craftsman for the Terracotta Army. Having been forcibly conscripted into the service of the first Emperor, your life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army immediately plunged into the hellish reality of the workshop. Forget artistic tranquility. This was an oppressive, deafening, and profoundly unhealthy environment where the very air you breathed attacked your body, making your meticulous toil profoundly sucked. Imagine your daily workplace. It's not a quaint, quiet atelier. It's a vast, sprawling complex of open-air pits and rudimentary shelters, filled with hundreds, perhaps thousands of other craftsmen and laborers. The air is perpetually thick with clay dust, fine particles of earth and minerals constantly churned up by the mixing, molding, and shaping of the terracotta figures. Every breath you take draws these microscopic particles deep into your lungs, irritating your throat and coating your mouth with a persistent, gritty taste. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was a slow, insidious poisoning of your respiratory system. It truly sucked to literally choke on your work. The noise would be relentless and deafening, the rhythmic slapping of clay as it was kneaded and prepared, the constant grinding and pounding of tools as torsos, limbs, and heads were assembled, the shouts of overseers, the murmurs of thousands of workers, and the distant, dull roar of immense kilns where the figures were fired, all combined into a continuous cacophony that would pound relentlessly at your ears for hours on end, day after day. Communication would be difficult, requiring shouts and gestures over time. This constant exposure to extreme noise would inevitably lead to permanent hearing loss, slowly isolating you from the world around you, a silent and insidious occupational hazard that no one would acknowledge. Imagine living in a constant symphony of clattering and pounding, slowly losing your ability to hear outside the workshop. It really sucked to go deaf for a silent army. Beyond the immediate workshop, the presence of numerous kilns added another layer of environmental horror. These enormous brick or earth kilns, where the terracotta figures were fired at high temperatures up to 950 10 degrees or 1740 and 1920 degrees, would constantly fill the air with wood smoke, ash, and particulate matter. The fumes from the burning wood, combined with the general dust, created a suffocating atmosphere that permeated the entire complex. You would be constantly inhaling these irritants, contributing to chronic coughs, bronchitis, and over time, debilitating lung diseases similar to black lung or silicosis. Your lungs would gradually become inflamed and scarred, making every breath a labored struggle, literally suffocating you from the inside out. The cramped and unsanitary conditions of the workshops further exacerbated these issues. While the scale was immense, the individual workspaces were often small, forcing craftsmen to work in tight quarters often hunched over their figures for hours. Ventilation was rudimentary, usually just an open side or a basic flue, rarely sufficient to clear the heavy dust and smoke. Waste materials, broken clay, and the effluvia of hundreds of unwashed bodies would accumulate in corners, attracting insects and rodents, contributing to a pervasive smell of sweat, damp earth, and decaying organic matter. This combination of poor air quality, limited space, and inadequate hygiene created a pervasive atmosphere of discomfort and increased the risk of widespread illness. Imagine sharing your cramped breathing space with dust, smoke, and vermin. The lighting conditions were also terrible. You'd work from dawn until dusk, relying on natural light, which could be dim in certain areas or during cloudy weather. As the day faded, your labor would continue by the flickering, smoky illumination of oil lamps or candles. This poor lighting would strain your eyes, forcing you to squint to discern fine details, contributing to chronic eye strain, headaches, and ultimately, premature vision impairment. The demand for meticulous detail, even in challenging lighting, ensured your eyesight was sacrificed for the emperor's immortality. It really sucked to literally go blind for a statue's eyes. The psychological toll of working in such an oppressive and unhealthy environment cannot be overstated. The constant sensory assault, the noise, the dust, the smoke, the pervasive smell, combined with the physical demands and the ever-present threat of punishment, would erode your spirit. You would live with a perpetual sense of exhaustion, your body aching, your lungs burning, your ears ringing, and your eyes straining. The grim, monotonous reality of your daily grind would consume your very being, turning you into a functional automaton, your creative spirit slowly dulled by the harshness of your surroundings. One common misconception is that the workshops of the Terracotta Army were simply massive, open-air factories. While they were large, the need for controlled environments for delicate clay work and for efficient firing meant specific structures were used, leading to localized concentrations of heat, dust, and fumes. Furthermore, archaeological evidence suggests that workshops were often located close to the burial mound, minimizing transport but maximizing exposure to other hazards of the overall mausoleum complex. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Qin Dynasty workshop remains, analyzing the types of clay, tools, and kilns found to reconstruct the precise working conditions and their immediate impact on the health of the craftsman, confirming the widespread presence of respiratory and other occupational hazards. The constant exposure to the raw materials also brought its own set of dangers. The very clay you molded could contain various minerals, some of which might be mildly irritating or even toxic if inhaled or absorbed over time. The processes of preparing the clay, crushing, sifting, mixing, would generate immense amounts of dust. Even the tools you used, often made of bronze or iron, could lead to minor cuts or abrasions, which in such an unsanitary environment could easily become infected, turning into life-threatening complications without modern medicine. Furthermore, the scale of the operation meant that the working conditions were often prioritized for efficiency over worker safety. The emperor's demand for thousands of figures, completed within a strict timeline for his burial, pushed overseers to maximize output, often at the expense of ventilation, cleanliness, and the basic well-being of the craftsman. Your personal health was a secondary concern to the grand imperial project, ensuring that every piece of terracotta produced was paid for not just with skill, but with sweat, suffering, and slow physical deterioration. So, your daily life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked by the hellish reality of the workshop, the oppressive heat, the suffocating dust, the deafening noise, the toxic fumes, and the cramped, unsanitary conditions combine to create a constant physical assault on your body and senses, this unrelenting, unhealthy environment where you literally breathed in your craft was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your toil, ensuring that the creation of the Emperor's immortal army was paid for with the systematic erosion of your own health and vitality. Even as you navigated the suffocating confines of the workshop and battled the incessant noise and dust, your life as an ancient Chinese craftsman for the Terracotta Army was fundamentally defined by endless toil and repetitive strain. Forget artistic freedom or varied tasks. Your existence was a relentless cycle of precise, monotonous movements, leading to profound physical exhaustion, chronic pain, and an insidious erosion of your body over time, making your daily grind profoundly sucked. Imagine your workday. It would begin before dawn, often in the deep, quiet gloom of the workshop, illuminated only by the faint, flickering glow of oil lamps or charcoal braziers. You would be among the first to rise, making your way to your designated workstation, often a simple stool before a pile of clay, your task for the day, and for virtually every day that stretched endlessly before you, was to sculpt. This wasn't a job where you switched between different activities. It was a highly specialized, intensely repetitive labor that demanded your focused attention and physical endurance for hours on end, stretching from dawn until well past dusk, or even through the night, driven by the relentless quotas of the imperial project. Your entire waking life was consumed by the molding of clay. It truly sucked to be a human sculpting machine, perpetually churning out identical yet distinct faces. The process of creating each terracotta figure, whether a soldier, horse, or chariot component, involved a series of highly precise, repetitive motions, while each figure was designed to be unique in its facial features. The underlying methods of construction were standardized for mass production. You would primarily be involved in shaping various parts using coils of clay, molds, and your own hands. This meant molding body parts, large sections of the figure's torsos, limbs, heads were often mass-produced from molds. Your task might involve pressing clay into these molds, carefully removing the formed pieces, and then assembling them. This required strength and precision, repeatedly, hundreds of times a day. Sculpting details, once the basic body was assembled, your skill as a craftsman would come into play, but again, often repetitively. You might specialize in sculpting the unique facial features, eyebrows, mustaches, ears, the intricate hairstyles, or the folds of drapery on the uniforms. This demanded incredible fine motor control and consistent attention to detail, repeated across hundreds of figures. Finishing and smoothing after sculpting. The figures needed extensive finishing. You would spend hours smoothing the surfaces, meticulously refining details, and preparing the figures for firing. This involved constant pressure, precise hand movements, and unwavering focus. Think about the physical toll of these unending, precise motions. Your hands and fingers would be perpetually sore, cramped, and calloused from constantly manipulating clay, pressing into molds, and sculpting fine details. The repetitive strain could lead to chronic pain, tendinitis, and premature arthritis in your wrists and fingers, making your most essential tools, your own digits, gnarled and stiff. Your back and neck would be perpetually stiff and sore from long hours spent hunched over your figures, often in awkward, fixed positions, straining to achieve perfect symmetry and detail. This wasn't just discomfort, it was a systemic breakdown of your musculoskeletal system, slowly grinding your body down with every single figure sculpted. It really sucked to literally work yourself to pieces, shaping a silent army. The sheer volume of production amplified this repetitive strain. The Terracotta Army comprises over 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, 5 out of 20 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, each figure roughly life-sized and requiring meticulous craftsmanship. This meant you were not producing one masterpiece. You were part of a vast assembly line, responsible for producing dozens, perhaps hundreds, of similar yet unique components. The pressure to meet demanding quotas, imposed by ruthless overseers, meant you worked at an unrelenting pace, pushing your body beyond its limits. Even as your muscles screamed in protest, your individual output, however small in the grand scheme, was meticulously tracked, and any perceived slowness would be met with harsh discipline. The long working hours were relentless and soul-crushing. Your livelihood, whether you were a conscripted artisan or an imperial workshop slave, depended directly on your output. This meant working from dawn until well into the night, often by the dim, flickering light of oil lamps or braziers to maximize production and meet stringent imperial deadlines. There were no defined weekends or holidays as we know them today, beyond perhaps a few major imperial or seasonal festivals, which would be brief respites at best. Your entire waking life was consumed by the demands of the workshop, leaving little time or energy for leisure, personal pursuits, or even adequate, restorative rest. This relentless schedule compounded your physical exhaustion, ensuring your body was in a perpetual state of weariness, slowly but surely succumbing to the cumulative strain. The dust from the clay and the fumes from the kilns, as discussed in Chapter 2, further exacerbated the physical toll. While sculpting, you would constantly be inhaling fine clay particles. This, combined with the smoke and particulate matter from the nearby kilns, contributed to chronic respiratory issues, exacerbating any pre-existing lung problems. The environment itself was designed to slowly chip away at your health, transforming your body into another casualty of the emperor's ambition. One common misconception is that the Terracotta Army figures were entirely unique, sculpted from scratch by individual artisans. While each soldier's face and hairstyle indeed have unique details, the bodies and major components, torsos, legs were often mass-produced using molds, with individual craftsmen then adding the distinct facial features, hair, and armor details. This combination of mass production and individual detailing allowed for both efficiency, producing thousands of figures, and the remarkable realism and individuality that makes the Terracotta Army so famous. This sophisticated assembly line approach, however, did not diminish the sheer physical labor or the repetitive strain on the individual craftsman, but rather channeled it into specific, repetitive tasks. Historians still meticulously study the various mold marks, assembly techniques, and sculpting styles on the figures to understand the precise division of labor and the mass production methods employed, revealing a complex industrial process. Furthermore, the lack of safety precautions was absolute. You worked with heavy clay, potentially unstable molds, and sharp sculpting tools, often in crowded conditions. A dropped piece of clay, a slipped tool, or a sudden collapse of a raw figure could lead to injuries. These minor accidents, common in manual labor, could easily become infected in the unsanitary workshop environment, leading to severe, potentially fatal complications without modern medicine. Your dedication to perfection ironically increased your vulnerability to injury. The psychological toll of this endless, repetitive labor was immense. The sheer monotony, the constant focus on minute details, and the lack of variation would dull your mind. You would feel like a small cog in a vast, unchanging machine, your individuality slowly eroded by the rhythmic, unceasing demands of the workshop, the knowledge that you were producing an army for a dead emperor, for a soulless purpose, might also contribute to a profound sense of meaninglessness, this profound sense of being trapped in an endless cycle of toil, with little hope of escape or meaningful change, would lead to a deep-seated weariness that transcended mere physical fatigue, ensuring your life was utterly consumed by the pursuit of endless, lifeless perfection. So, your daily life as an ancient Chinese craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked due to endless toil and repetitive strain. The constant, precise movements of sculpting, molding, and finishing, performed for long hours in cramped, noisy, and often unhealthy conditions, systematically broke down your body. This relentless, physically destructive labor was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your life, ensuring that the creation of the first emperor's colossal, immortal army was paid for with the silent, agonizing suffering and slow physical decay of its human sculptors. Even as your body struggled with the endless, repetitive toil on the workshop floor, and your lungs slowly filled with clay dust, your life as an ancient Chinese craftsman for the Terracotta Army exposed you to a more insidious, yet profoundly terrifying, danger-toxic materials. Forget benign clay. Your daily grind involved working intimately with poisonous pigments and hazardous finishing substances, making your craft profoundly sucked. Imagine your workstation now, perhaps in a separate area of the vast complex where the finished figures were painted and prepared. The air is no longer just thick with clay dust and wood smoke. It carries the pungent, often acrid, smell of various mineral pigments being ground, mixed and applied. Large vats or shallow bowls of colorful, yet incredibly dangerous substances would be spread before you. Your hands, perpetually stained by these vibrant hues, would be immersed in these concoctions, applying paint with brushes or mixing the raw pigments with binders. This wasn't just messy, it was a constant, intimate contact with potent, silent killers. It truly sucked to be poisoned by beautiful colors. The Terracotta Army figures, when first excavated, were found to have remnants of vibrant polychrome paint, which unfortunately degraded rapidly upon exposure to air. This indicates a sophisticated use of pigments, many of which were incredibly toxic. Lead-based pigments, red, white, and yellow colors were frequently derived from lead compounds like red lead or lead white. Chronic exposure to lead, through skin absorption, especially from constantly wet hands, inhalation of fine dust from grinding pigments, or accidental ingestion, e.e., ajjai, touching contaminated hands to mouth, leads to severe lead poisoning? Imagine the insidious onset, excruciating abdominal pain colic, profound anemia fatigue, pallor, neurological damage leading to tremors, weakness, even paralysis or mental dullness, kidney failure, and reproductive issues. Your body would slowly, agonizingly deteriorate, its internal systems failing. Without you ever understanding the true cause, you would attribute your constant stomach aches, your shaking hands, or your mental fogginess to general illness or the grueling nature of your work, never realizing that the very colors you crafted were systematically destroying you from within. It really sucked when your art literally killed you slowly. Mercury-based pigments, a brilliant red color known as vermilion cinnabar or mercury sulfide, was highly prized and used extensively. Mercury, even in its less volatile forms, is a highly toxic heavy metal. Inhaling its vapors, especially when the pigments were heated during processing or if used near kilns or absorbing it through the skin, could lead to devastating mercury poisoning. Symptoms include severe neurological damage, tremors, mood swings, irritability, memory loss, and even psychosis, the historical basis for the phrase mad as a hatter, kidney failure, gastrointestinal distress, and dental problems. Imagine your hands shaking uncontrollably, your temper flaring inexplicably, or your memory failing, all due to the beautiful red pigment you use daily. It really sucked to literally lose your mind to a color. Arsenic-based pigments, yellow and green dyes, could be derived from arsenic compounds like orpiment for yellow or realgar for orange-red. Arsenic is a potent poison capable of causing skin lesions, gastrointestinal distress, neurological damage, respiratory problems, and various cancers. Chronic exposure would lead to a slow, agonizing decline, often with visible, horrifying skin manifestations. Other heavy metals. Other metals like copper and iron were used, either as pigments or as components of binders or mordants, substances used to fix dyes, which could also be toxic in large or prolonged exposures. Your daily contact with these substances was relentless. Your bare hands would be stained, often a grim kaleidoscope of colors that indicated your profession. You'd be reaching into vats, stirring dyes, or applying paints directly, ensuring constant skin absorption. The air would be filled with fine particulate matter from powdered pigments generated during grinding and mixing, or toxic vapors from heated liquids, ensuring inhalation. Without any understanding of protective gear, no gloves, no masks, no ventilation systems beyond a basic flue, you were utterly defenseless against these silent, insidious killers. Your body was a direct conduit for the very toxins you used to create beauty. It really sucked to have no idea your job was murdering you. The symptoms of chronic poisoning would be insidious, slowly creeping up on you. You might attribute your constant fatigue, headaches, stomach pains, or tremors to general illness or the grueling nature of your work, never realizing that the very colors you crafted were systematically destroying your internal organs and nervous system. The lack of accurate medical diagnosis in ancient China meant that these occupational diseases were largely undiagnosed, their true cause remaining a mystery, leaving you to suffer without understanding or hope. One common misconception is that all ancient Chinese pigments were naturally derived from harmless plant extracts. While many vegetable dyes were used for textiles, the vibrant, permanent, and mineral-based colors used for painting sculptures and murals often incorporated highly toxic heavy metals. The remarkable durability and vibrancy of the Terracotta Army's original paint layer were achieved, in part, through the use of these dangerous compounds, highlighting a technological advancement gained at a severe human cost. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of pigments from the Terracotta Army. Using modern chemical analysis like X-ray fluorescence and scanning electron microscopy to identify the precise compounds used and to understand the specific occupational hazards faced by ancient painters and artisans. Furthermore, the waste products from the painting and finishing processes, often highly contaminated with these heavy metals, would be dumped into local pits or rivers. This would pollute the surrounding environment, posing further risk to the wider community, including your own family, who might rely on those same water sources. Your dangerous work not only poisoned you, but contributed to the broader environmental contamination, highlighting a grim cycle of industrial pollution long before the modern era, the psychological toll of enduring chronic pain, inexplicable illnesses, and watching your body slowly deteriorate, all while knowing your livelihood depended on continuing this dangerous work. would be immense. You would live with a constant sense of unease. Your body a canvas of beautiful, yet dangerous colors, slowly consumed by the very beauty it created. The paradox of bringing life-like vibrancy to clay figures, even as your own life was slowly extinguished by the paints, would be a chilling, unspoken irony. So, your daily life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked due to the hidden, yet constant, toxic perils of working with poisonous pigments and materials, working intimately with lead, mercury, arsenic, and other hazardous substances without protection or knowledge of their dangers, systematically destroyed your body, leading to chronic illness, slow poisoning, and an agonizing demise. This relentless chemical assault was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your life, ensuring that the creation of the Emperor's immortal army was paid for with your health and, ultimately, your very life, even as your powerful hands deftly applied the toxic pigments, and your body struggled with the slow poisoning from the paints. Your life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was perpetually dominated by another relentless torment, strict supervision, and the ever-present whip. Forget artistic freedom or a leisurely pace. Your existence was enforced by brutal discipline and the constant threat of agonizing physical punishment for any error or perceived defiance, ensuring ruthless efficiency at the cost of your very dignity. This meticulous, fear-driven management made your esteemed craft profoundly sucked. Imagine your daily reality within the vast workshop complex. You weren't a solitary artist, left to your own creative devices. Instead, you were one among thousands of craftsmen, organized into tightly controlled work gangs or specialized teams. Each team would be responsible for a specific part of the process, perhaps molding torsos, sculpting heads, painting armor, or applying the final lacquer. Your direct overseers were not fellow artisans who understood the nuances of your craft. They were often military officers, hardened officials, or brutal foremen armed with whips, cudgels, or heavy bamboo sticks. Their primary, indeed their only, goal was to ensure maximum output and flawless adherence to imperial specifications, regardless of your personal fatigue, pain, or artistic challenges. It truly sucked to have your artistic process controlled by a drill sergeant. The atmosphere in the workshop was one of pervasive, gnawing fear. Every single stroke of your sculpting tool, every meticulous application of paint, every movement you made was performed under the watchful, scrutinizing eyes of these overseers. They would patrol the workshops constantly, their presence a chilling reminder of the consequences of failure, any perceived laziness, a moment of rest too long, a visible sign of exhaustion, or a slight deviation from the mandated design could result in swift and agonizing physical punishment. You learn to keep your head down, your hands moving relentlessly, and your expression impassive, lest the sharp crack of the whip find your skin. Physical punishment was not uncommon. It was a commonplace, expected part of the management system. For minor infractions, a chipped piece of clay, a smudge of paint, a moment of inattention, or even a tired slump, you might face a beating with rods or whips. Imagine the searing pain as the heavy stick cracked against your back, your legs, or your bare hands, leaving deep welts, bruises, and permanent scars that would crisscross your body for the rest of your short life. These beatings were designed to be both physically excruciating and publicly humiliating, serving as a stark warning to others. The screams of a fellow craftsman echoing through the workshop, the dull, sickening thud of the whip on bare skin would be a constant soundtrack, chilling you to the bone and reinforcing the brutal reality of your situation. It really sucked to get a permanent scar for a tiny mistake. For more serious offenses, such as significant errors in the figures, perhaps a deviation from the official facial features or uniform details, intentional sabotage, attempting to escape, or outright insubordination. The consequences were even more brutal and often fatal. You might be subjected to torture, designed to extract confessions or to simply make a terrifying example of you. This could involve excruciating methods that would leave you permanently maimed, disfigured, or dead. Executions, often public and performed within the construction complex or at its gates, were not uncommon for those who challenged the system or whose actions were deemed a significant threat to imperial order and the project's timeline. Imagine watching a comrade being executed. His life ended not by an enemy on a battlefield, but by his own government, for the crime of trying to flee endless suffering. His dying breaths serving as a grim lesson for all who remained. It really sucked when your only way out was to die publicly. This pervasive system of fear and physical discipline aimed to strip away your individuality and instill absolute, unquestioning obedience and conformity. You were reduced to a nameless cog in a vast, brutal, artistic machine, expected to work until you dropped, without complaint, without a moment's rest beyond what was absolutely necessary, and without any thought of rebellion. The overseers cultivated an atmosphere of perpetual terror, ensuring that the human will was completely subjugated to the imperial project of building the Terracotta Army. Your spirit, once free and creative, would slowly be crushed under the unbearable weight of constant threats and brutal realities, leaving you a hollowed-out shell, merely existing to sculpt and paint. The quotas were relentless and often impossible to meet. Each work gang, each specialized workshop would have strict, demanding quotas for the number of figures or components to be completed per day or week. Failure to meet these quotas, regardless of your exhaustion, your illness from clay dust or toxic pigments, or the sheer impossibility of the task given the tools and conditions, would result in immediate and often collective punishment. This could mean a reduction in your already meager rations, a mass flogging for the entire gang, or additional hours of brutal, unpaid labor. This constant pressure forced you to push yourself and your comrades to the absolute physical and mental brink, fostering a desperate competition for survival among the craftsmen themselves. Rather than camaraderie, it truly sucked to be punished for things you couldn't possibly control, like the quality of the clay or your own failing eyesight. One common misconception is that ancient Chinese rulers always treated their skilled artisans with respect and provided them with good conditions due to their unique talents. While some legendary artisans might have gained fame and patronage, the vast majority of skilled laborers on imperial projects like the Terracotta Army were subject to immense exploitation and harsh conditions. Often treated as conscripted labor or even penal slaves, their skills were valued, but their lives were expendable in the face of the emperor's grand vision, the very scale of the Terracotta Army project, requiring thousands of hands, meant that individualized artistic freedom or humane conditions were secondary to mass production and strict adherence to design. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from Qin Dynasty workshop sites, including remnants of tools, incomplete figures, and potential burial sites, and compare them with surviving Qin legal codes, which detail harsh punishments for workers on state projects to understand the precise balance between respect for skill and brutal exploitation. Furthermore, the very physical environment of the workshop amplified the effectiveness of this discipline. In the crowded, often open air, yet confined spaces, there was literally nowhere to hide from the overseer's gaze or the reach of his whip. The constant noise would carry the screams of the punished, serving as a chilling auditory reminder to everyone nearby. This constant scrutiny, combined with the omnipresent threat of physical pain, ensured that you were always performing at your peak, regardless of your personal exhaustion or internal pain, leaving you with no respite. The sheer dehumanization inherent in this system of discipline cannot be overstated. You were not a citizen with rights, not a celebrated artist. You were a nameless, disposable body, a resource to be used, broken, and discarded as needed. Your pain, your suffering, your eventual death. These were mere statistics in the grand imperial ledger, insignificant against the backdrop of the colossal, immortal army you were creating. This deliberate stripping away of human dignity, this reduction to a mere physical unit of labor, was perhaps the most terrible cost of all, endured with every precise sculpting motion and every brutal lash. The constant fear eroded your spirit, leaving you perpetually vigilant, perpetually subservient, and perpetually miserable, knowing your entire existence was defined by the relentless, often painful, creation of the Emperor's terracotta warriors. So, your daily life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked by the pervasive reality of strict supervision and the ever-present whip. The constant fear of physical punishment, the public humiliation, the sheer physical agony, and the ultimate threat of death for any perceived failure ensured your absolute submission. This relentless, dehumanizing subjugation was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your toil, ensuring that every terracotta figure produced was literally sculpted into existence with your fear, your blood, and your shattered spirit, under the ever-watchful, unforgiving eye of the imperial state. Even as your body suffered the relentless physical toll of repetitive strain, and your lungs struggled with the insidious effects of toxic pigments, your life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was overshadowed by an even more chilling reality secrecy and isolation. Forget any connection to the outside world or your family. You were condemned to forced confinement, guarded by impenetrable walls, and faced an ultimate, terrifying fate designed to ensure the Emperor's secrets remained buried, making your life profoundly sucked. Imagine your existence within the sprawling mausoleum complex. The entire site was an immense state secret, the personal project of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, who was obsessed with its completion before his death. This obsession translated into an extreme need for absolute secrecy regarding the scale, contents, and very existence of his subterranean empire, and you, the craftsman, were a living repository of these secrets. It truly sucked to be a human secret keeper. From the moment you were conscripted or assigned to the project, you were effectively imprisoned within the construction site. The vast complex, covering miles, was surrounded by imposing walls, guarded by disciplined soldiers and overseers. There was no coming and going at will. Your movements were severely restricted, your interactions monitored, and your communication with the outside world virtually severed. You were part of a massive, isolated community of laborers and artisans, cut off from your former life, your family, and any news from your home village. Imagine living for years, perhaps decades, without seeing your parents, your wife, or your children. Their faces slowly fading in your memory, their lives continuing without you. It really sucked to be buried alive, metaphorically, This physical isolation was absolute. The Qin dynasty's strict laws and efficient administration meant that anyone attempting to leave the site without authorization would be immediately pursued, captured, and severely punished, often with death. The surrounding wilderness, if you managed to evade the guards, offered little hope. Vast, empty plains, treacherous mountains, or arid deserts with no food, no water, and no familiar paths back home. You were effectively buried alive within the confines of the massive construction site. Your prison walls made of both stone and the vast, unforgiving landscape, the informational isolation was equally profound. You were forbidden from discussing the details of the Terracotta Army or the mausoleum complex with anyone, even your fellow craftsmen. Beyond what was necessary for your immediate task, spies and informants would likely be present among the laborers, reporting any suspicious conversations or signs of disloyalty. The punishment for revealing imperial secrets was swift and brutal, often execution, or even the annihilation of your entire family, a terrifying deterrent that ensured your silence. Imagine constantly self-censoring your words, perpetually aware that a wrong phrase could lead to your death. It really sucked to literally bite your tongue until you bled. The ultimate and most disturbing aspect of this secrecy and isolation was the fate that awaited many craftsmen upon the project's completion, or upon the emperor's death. Ancient historical accounts, particularly those from Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, chillingly suggest that after Qin Shi Huang's burial, the inner gates of the mausoleum were sealed, and the outer gates were then lowered, effectively trapping and burying alive many of the artisans and laborers who worked on the tomb's interior. This was done to ensure that the emperor's secrets, the layout of his tomb, the mechanisms of its traps like mercury rivers, and the location of his treasures would remain forever hidden. Imagine finishing your life's work, only for the exit to become your final. Suffocating prison. It truly sucked to have your masterpiece be your tomb. While the exact number of craftsmen buried alive is debated by modern historians, some argue it was a symbolic act, others that it was a literal, brutal reality for thousands. The pervasive fear of this fate would have hung over every artisan. You worked knowing that your very skill in building the tomb might condemn you to be its eternal captive. This chilling prospect instilled a profound psychological terror, driving you to work meticulously, yet paradoxically, towards your own potential doom. One common misconception is that the Qin dynasty solely relied on brute force and fear. While brutality was central, the sophisticated organization and meticulous record-keeping of the Qin also highlight a pragmatic, ruthless efficiency. The policy of sealing the tomb with its craftsmen, if practiced, was the ultimate expression of this efficiency, maximizing security by eliminating all knowledge of the interior. This chilling logic of total security at any human cost demonstrates the extreme lengths to which the Qin Empire would go to preserve its secrets. Historians still meticulously study archaeological evidence from the mausoleum complex, including human remains in proximity to certain sealed passages and the often euphemistic language of ancient texts to interpret the precise methods and scale of this final act of secrecy. Furthermore, the very act of bringing the Terracotta Army to life, of sculpting thousands of unique faces and painting them with vibrant and toxic colors, was a testament to your artistic talent. Yet, this creativity was ultimately used for a soulless purpose to serve a dead emperor's eternal ambition. Your personal skill was subsumed by the monumental, yet lifeless, imperial vision, creating a profound existential irony that added to the misery of your confinement. The psychological toll of living in such pervasive secrecy, isolation, and constant fear of a horrifying, predetermined end would be immense. You would grapple with profound loneliness, a sense of being utterly cut off from the living world, and the terrifying knowledge that your hard work might lead directly to your own demise. This constant mental anguish, this awareness of being trapped in a grand, terrifying project, would erode your spirit, making your life a perpetual battle against despair. So, your life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked due to the chilling reality of secrecy and isolation, forced into confinement, separated from your family, subjected to constant surveillance, and ultimately facing the terrifying prospect of being buried alive with the Emperor's secrets. Your existence was a profound act of self-sacrifice. This pervasive physical and informational isolation was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your toil, ensuring that your magnificent craftsmanship was entombed in a legacy of brutal, anonymous suffering, even as your body slowly crumbled under the relentless physical strain and you lived under the shadow of terrifying secrecy. Your existence as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was plagued by a profound and cruel paradox. Your artistic talent was exploited for a soulless purpose, turning your magnificent skill into a tool for imperial obsession and making your life profoundly sucked. Imagine your identity as a craftsman. You were not a simple laborer. You possessed highly specialized skills passed down through generations, the ability to sculpt intricate forms from clay, to imbue a lifeless material with a semblance of vitality, to create beauty and realism in a different context. Your work might have been celebrated, your name revered, and your pieces cherished as individual works of art. But here, within the vast, brutal complex of the Emperor's mausoleum, your artistry was utterly stripped of its inherent value. It truly sucked to be an anonymous artist. Your purpose was not to create unique, expressive pieces for an appreciative patron. Instead, you were part of a vast mass production assembly line, tasked with creating thousands upon thousands of figures that, while having unique facial features, largely conformed to strict, standardized designs. You were given precise specifications for the posture of a soldier, the form of his armor, the precise details of his uniform. Your skill was not for individual artistic expression, but for meticulous replication and adherence to imperial uniformity. Imagine the soul-crushing monotony of sculpting hundreds of identical torsos, knowing your artistic flair was stifled by relentless repetition. It really sucked to be a human copy machine. The ultimate purpose of your artistic genius was chilling to create a lifeless army for a dead emperor. Qin Shi Huang was obsessed with immortality and ensuring his continued power in the afterlife. The Terracotta Army was a literal, underground replica of his imperial guard, designed to protect him in the spirit world. Your artistry, therefore, was dedicated not to inspiring awe in the living, but to providing eternal comfort and security for a deceased ruler. Your creations were destined to be buried in perpetual darkness, unseen by human eyes for millennia, serving a cold, utilitarian function for a dead man's ambition. It truly sucked to create beauty for a ghost. This profound disconnection between your artistic talent and its soulless purpose would inflict immense psychological torment. You poured your skill, your precision, your very essence into each figure, imbuing it with lifelike detail, yet you knew it would never breathe, never fight, never be truly appreciated in the light of day. The creative spark, the drive to express, would be systematically stifled by the demands for endless, uniform production. This constant suppression of your artistic soul, forcing it into mechanical repetition, would lead to deep frustration and existential despair. Furthermore, your anonymity was absolute, while some figures occasionally bear faint marks or signatures of the workshops where they were made a common historical fact that helps historians understand the organization of labor. Your individual name, your personal artistic legacy would be lost in the sheer scale of the project. Unlike celebrated artists of later dynasties whose names might be known, you were a nameless cog in a vast imperial machine. Your contributions absorbed into the collective, unseen effort. Your unique skill was merely a means to an end for the emperor's posthumous glory. It really sucked to have your masterpiece forgotten. The prestige of your craft, while perhaps acknowledged in your village, was utterly subsumed by your status as a forced laborer. You might be a master sculptor, capable of breathtaking detail, but you were still subject to the whip of an overseer who likely had no understanding or appreciation for your artistic talent. Your skill offered no protection from brutal discipline, no reprieve from starvation, and no escape from your ultimate fate. This profound disconnect between your inherent worth as an artist and your perceived expendability as a laborer was a constant. Bitter irony. One common misconception is that the Terracotta Army artisans were treated as highly respected artists, similar to Renaissance masters. In reality, while their skills were essential, they operated within a rigid, authoritarian system that prioritized imperial control and project completion over individual artistic freedom or personal welfare. Their work, though artistic, was fundamentally treated as a form of labor, subject to the same brutal conditions and punishments as common conscripts. Historians still meticulously study the marks on the figures, identifying different workshop styles and evidence of mass production, which underscores the industrial scale exploitation of these highly skilled individuals, rather than celebrating their personal artistic genius in a modern sense. Moreover, the sheer volume of work demanded by the emperor's obsession meant that quality, while important, was achieved through relentless pressure rather than careful, unhurried artistry. You were constantly pushed to produce more, faster, even if it meant sacrificing the intrinsic joy of creation. The artistic process, which should have been a source of fulfillment, became a source of never-ending stress and physical exhaustion, reducing your magnificent talent to a mere function of imperial will. The psychological toll of creating something so grand, yet so lifeless, would be immense. You were bringing thousands of human-like figures into being, but they were destined for an eternal silence, a subterranean void. This constant engagement with an army of the dead, imbued with your own skill but without a soul, might have instilled a profound sense of meaninglessness in your work, a chilling parallel to your own life slowly being extinguished for a monument that would outlast you. So, your life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked due to the perverse paradox of your artistic talent being exploited for a soulless purpose. Your skill was consumed by mass production, stifled by rigid adherence to imperial designs, and ultimately dedicated to an army destined for an unseen, eternal tomb. This profound dehumanization of your creative spirit, ensuring your magnificent craftsmanship remained anonymous and subservient, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your toil, turning beauty into a source of your suffering. Even as your artistic soul withered under the relentless demands of repetitive toil and soulless purpose, your existence as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was a perpetual race against the clock, relentlessly driven by constant pressure, Forget a relaxed pace or artistic contemplation. The emperor's unyielding demand for speed and perfection, driven by his obsession with his afterlife, ensured your life was a continuous, brutal grind, making your work profoundly sucked. Imagine the pervasive atmosphere within the workshop. It wasn't one of calm, artistic endeavor. It was a factory floor, dominated by the relentless demands of quotas and deadlines. Your overseers, whether military officers or brutal foremen, were constantly pushing for more, faster, and without error. The emperor's decree was absolute. Thousands of figures, meticulously crafted and fired, had to be completed within a strict, unforgiving timeline to accompany him into his tomb upon his death. Your life became a frantic countdown, tied directly to the emperor's mortality. It truly sucked to have your pace dictated by a dying emperor. The unyielding quotas were a defining aspect of your misery. Each work gang, each specialized team, and even individual craftsmen would be assigned daily or weekly targets for the number of figures or components they had to produce. These quotas were often impossibly high, designed to extract the maximum possible output from every laborer. Imagine starting your day knowing that you had to sculpt X number of faces or assemble Y number of torsos, regardless of your fatigue, your aching hands, or the quality of the raw materials. Failure to meet these quotas would result in swift and brutal punishment, from floggings to reduced rations, pushing you to work at a frantic, unsustainable pace. The emperor's obsession with his afterlife was the ultimate driver of this pressure. Qin Shi Huang believed that his mausoleum and the Terracotta Army within it were essential for his eternal reign and protection in the spirit world. This deeply personal and profoundly ambitious vision meant that the project could not falter, could not be delayed. Your labor was not just for earthly glory, it was for the emperor's immortality. This cosmic deadline amplified the pressure on every craftsman, making every moment of your work a direct contribution to a divine, yet terrifying, imperative. It really sucked to have an immortal boss who demanded eternal speed. The sheer scale of the project meant constant, relentless demand with over 8,000 soldiers, chariots, and horses to produce. The imperial workshops needed a continuous, massive output. This ensured that there was rarely a moment of true rest or reprieve. As soon as one batch of figures was completed, another began. The kilns were constantly roaring, the molding pits perpetually active, and the painting stations ceaselessly busy. Your life was consumed by this vast, unending production line, leaving little time for personal life, family, or adequate rest. The division of labor, while increasing efficiency, also contributed to the relentless pressure. As a specialist in one part of the process, e.g., sculpting heads, molding torsos, or painting details, you would be constantly dependent on the output of the previous stage and under pressure to quickly pass your work to the next. This created a complex, interdependent system where any slowdown in one area could affect the entire production chain, leading to collective punishment or increased pressure. You were a specialized cog in a massive, fast-moving machine. It really sucked to be constantly dependent on other overworked people. One unique detail highlighting this pressure for speed is the presence of unique inscriptions and seals on the Terracotta Army figures. Many figures bear the names or marks of individual craftsmen or the workshops they belong to. While this was partly for quality control, allowing superiors to identify and punish those responsible for flaws, it also served as a system of accountability and tracking output. This meant that your work was directly traceable to you, ensuring that you could be held personally responsible for meeting quotas and maintaining quality, intensifying the pressure to perform. Historians still meticulously study these marks to reconstruct the precise organization of the workshops and the management of individual artisans, revealing a sophisticated yet ruthlessly efficient system of labor control. Furthermore, the very concept of perfection under pressure was a cruel paradox. You were expected to produce lifelike, detailed figures, each unique in its facial features. Yet you had to do so at an incredibly fast pace. This meant that the inherent artistic drive to create something beautiful and flawless clashed with the demands for speed, often leading to immense frustration, and the psychological burden of knowing your best work was constrained by a brutal timeline. You were a skilled artist, forced to operate at a craftsman's pace, often with a laborer's tools. The threat of punishment for not meeting quotas or for producing flawed work was a constant motivator. As discussed in Chapter 5, Physical Beatings, reduced rations, or even execution were real possibilities. This constant fear of reprisal ensured that you would push yourself and your body beyond its limits. Driven by desperation rather than artistic passion or personal loyalty, the ultimate sacrifice of your health and well-being was a direct result of this unyielding pressure. The psychological toll of living under such constant, relentless pressure would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, always rushing, always fearing failure, always aware of the emperor's impending death and the associated deadline. Sleep would be restless, plagued by thoughts of uncompleted tasks. Your mind would be constantly engaged in calculating output, analyzing efficiency, and trying to find ways to meet impossible demands, leaving little room for any other form of mental peace. So, your daily life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was profoundly sucked by constant pressure, the unyielding quotas, the unforgiving timeline dictated by the emperor's obsession with his afterlife, and the relentless demands for speed and perfection ensured that your existence was a continuous, brutal grind. This pervasive pressure, enforced by ruthless overseers, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your toil, ensuring that every piece of terracotta produced was literally sculpted into existence with your anxiety, your exhaustion, and the relentless driving force of imperial ambition. Even as your spirit wrestled with the relentless demands of quotas and your body endured the insidious effects of toxic pigments. Your life as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was perpetually defined by a chilling final chapter, the long march to your tomb. Forget a peaceful retirement. You were condemned to a final, arduous journey, escorting the very figures you created to their eternal burial pits, often nearing your own grim, inescapable end. This made your daily grind profoundly sucked. Imagine the culmination of your decades of brutal labor. The thousands of terracotta figures are finally complete, meticulously painted, and ready for their subterranean eternal repose. Now, they must be transported from the workshops to the vast burial pits within the emperor's mausoleum complex. This wasn't a simple task. It was a massive, highly orchestrated logistical operation, and you, the craftsman, were often part of it. It truly sucked to deliver your masterpieces to their grave. The figures were incredibly heavy and fragile. Each life-sized soldier or horse statue weighed hundreds of pounds. They had to be moved with immense care to prevent breakage, a task requiring hundreds of men. You would be involved in the painstaking process of hauling these heavy figures through underground ramps and tunnels or across vast open areas of the complex. This involved brute human force, using ropes, wooden rollers, and perhaps rudimentary sledges. Your body, already broken by years of sculpting, painting, and repetitive strain, would be pushed to its absolute limits, straining under the immense weight, knowing that any mistake could shatter a figure and incur severe punishment or lead to a crushing injury for you. It really sucked to literally break your back moving clay. The journey to the burial pits themselves would be a descent into a vast subterranean realm. These pits were immense, excavated deep into the earth, covered by heavy wooden ceilings, and later, tons of earth. As you moved the figures into these pits, you would be entering the very tomb complex that was meant to be sealed forever. The air would be damp, earthy, and claustrophobic. The only light would come from flickering torches, casting dancing shadows across the rows of silent, waiting terracotta warriors. This was a grim, silent procession towards the Emperor's eternal empire, and your senses would be assaulted by the confined space and the oppressive silence of a subterranean world. For many craftsmen, this final act of transporting the figures was also a symbolic, and sometimes literal, march towards their own end, as we've discussed. Historical accounts chillingly suggest that many artisans and laborers who worked on the tomb's interior were trapped and buried alive within the mausoleum complex after the emperor's burial, to ensure the absolute secrecy of its contents and layout. While the precise scale of this practice is debated, the fear of this fate would have permeated the minds of all who worked on the final stages of the mausoleum. Imagine hauling the last statue into place, hearing the rumble of the massive stone gates above you, knowing that your path to the living world might be closing forever. It truly sucked to be sealed in with your creations. Even if you were not among those literally entombed, your connection to the Mausoleum Project meant your fate was inextricably linked to the Emperor's death. The completion of the army and his burial would often coincide with the mass dismissal or execution of laborers and artisans to prevent any knowledge of the tomb's secrets from leaking. You might be executed or sent to another, equally brutal, forced labor project, your retirement simply a transition to another form of misery. Your immense skill, once vital, now made you a dangerous liability, a witness to imperial secrets who could not be allowed to live freely. The psychological toll of this final stage would be immense. You had dedicated your life to creating an army for a dead emperor, knowing it would never see the light of day. You were now actively participating in its burial, a final act of entombment for your own hard work. The chilling silence of the burial pits, filled with thousands of inanimate figures, would contrast profoundly with the vibrant life you were leaving behind. This sense of meaninglessness, of your artistry being condemned to eternal darkness, would be a profound and enduring burden on your spirit. It really sucked to have your masterpiece be buried forever. One common misconception is that the Terracotta Army was completed in a single, continuous effort over just a few years. In reality, the mausoleum complex, including the army pits, was a massive project that spanned over 30 years, from Qin Shi Huang's ascension to the throne until after his death. This long timeline meant that various generations of craftsmen worked on the project, and the final stages of sealing the tomb would have involved artisans who had dedicated much of their adult lives to its creation. This long-term commitment made the ultimate, terrifying fate even more profound. Historians still meticulously study the construction phases and labor management practices of the entire mausoleum complex, analyzing archaeological evidence of different types of fill-in sealed passages and human remains within its proximity to understand the ultimate fate of its laborers. Furthermore, the very act of transporting the figures meant that you, the craftsman, were directly implicated in the emperor's grand, posthumous ambition You were not just a sculptor or a painter, you were a key player in the ritual of his eternal entombment. This direct participation in the final act of sealing away the emperor's secrets added a layer of profound responsibility and profound danger to your otherwise brutal existence. Your journey with the Terracotta Army concluded not with a grand unveiling, but with the descent into the silence and darkness of its eternal resting place. The atmosphere in the pits themselves would be heavy with dust and the smell of fresh earth, lit only by the flickering glow of lamps. The scale of the buried army, the sheer number of figures stretching into the darkness, would be overwhelming. A testament to the emperor's unyielding power. Even in death, you were literally surrounded by the cold, silent manifestation of your life's work, destined for an eternal, unseen vigil. So, your daily grind as a craftsman for the Terracotta Army concluded with the horrifying reality of the long march to your tomb. You were forced to transport your magnificent creations to their eternal burial pits, a physically brutal and psychologically terrifying final act. This profound service, culminating in the chilling prospect of being trapped with the Emperor's secrets or simply dismissed to an unknown fate, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your toil, ensuring that your life's work was entombed in a legacy of brutal, anonymous suffering. You've battled through the arduous journey of conscription, toiled in the hellish workshops filled with clay dust and deafening noise, endured endless repetitive strain, sacrificed your eyesight to intricate details, faced the insidious dangers of toxic pigments, witnessed the exploitation of child labor, struggled against economic chains, withered under pervasive social stigma, and finally, made the long march to your own potential tomb, burying the very figures you created. As the phantom smells of clay and ancient paint fade, and the distant clatter of unseen hammers finally dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Being a craftsman for the Terracotta Army was not a glorious artistic endeavor, it was a life of profound suffering, anonymous sacrifice, and ultimate erasure, making your existence truly sucked. Consider the relentless physical degradation that consumed your body, from the pervasive, suffocating clay dust that slowly choked your lungs, to the immense eye strain that inexorably led to premature blindness. Your muscles ached from endless repetitive strain. Your hands were gnarled and stiff with arthritis, and your body was ravaged by the insidious effects of lead, mercury, and arsenic from the vibrant paints. Accidents were common, the threat of collapse or a dropped statue ever present. You were a human machine, pushed beyond its limits, systematically broken down by the very materials and processes of your craft, ensuring a short, agonizing life. It truly sucked to have your body be a casualty of your art. Then there's the profound psychological torment and loss of identity. You were a skilled artisan, capable of imbuing lifeless clay with astonishing realism and individuality. Yet, your creative spirit was stifled by the demands for mass production and rigid adherence to imperial specifications. Your artistry was exploited for a soulless purpose to serve a dead emperor in his eternal tomb, meaning your masterpieces were destined for perpetual darkness. Unseen by human eyes, your unique talent was consumed by uniformity, and your name, your individual contribution, was lost in the vast, anonymous scale of the project. You became a nameless cog in a terrifying imperial machine, your very self erased. And what about the pervasive fear and total lack of freedom from the moment of your forced conscription? Your life was no longer your own. You were confined to the construction site, isolated from your family and the outside world by imposing walls and ruthless guards. Every movement, every word, every thought was under surveillance. The whip of the overseer was a constant companion, enforcing brutal discipline and demanding unyielding output, and the ultimate horror, the chilling prospect of being buried alive with the emperor's secrets, or executed to ensure his tomb's eternal security. You lived under the shadow of a terrifying, inescapable fate, your life consumed by fear and total subservience. It really sucked to be a prisoner of your own talent. Finally, the threadbare, almost non-existent, legacy. Despite your unparalleled contribution to one of the world's greatest archaeological wonders, your name is forgotten. No monuments were erected in your honor. No songs sung of your struggle. The very figures you poured your life into creating were buried in silence. Destined to remain hidden for millennia, your skill ensured the emperor's immortality, but your own memory was consigned to oblivion. The Terracotta Army stands as a testament to immense human achievement, but also, for you, a chilling monument to the anonymous, brutal sacrifice of countless skilled lives. It truly sucked to be an unsung, unseen genius. The sheer irony of the Terracotta Army's current fame contrasts sharply with the obscurity and suffering of its creators. Today, millions marvel at the unique faces and intricate details of the warriors, recognizing them as individual works of art within a collective, yet the very individuality you strive to create, and which is now celebrated, was forged under conditions designed to suppress your personal freedom and artistic autonomy. The modern appreciation for the craftsmanship stands as a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the brilliance that emerged from such a brutal, dehumanizing system, a testament to the enduring human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable oppression. Historians still meticulously study the marks and seals on the terracotta figures, attempting to piece together the identities of the workshop masters and the organization of labor, providing the only faint echoes of the artisan's presence. Ultimately, the story of what sucked about being a craftsman for the Terracotta Army is a profound, uncomfortable narrative of artistic genius brutally exploited for imperial ambition. It reveals how a civilization's desire for immortality and power was built on the systematic physical, psychological, and social degradation of its most skilled, yet most disposable laborers. The majestic army, for all its splendor, stands as an enduring monument not just to the emperor's might, but to the immense, anonymous suffering of the countless men who dedicated their entire lives and ultimately their very being to its creation. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant sounds of ancient workshops and the imagined dust of clay finally fade into the quiet background of history. You are safe, warm, and free, incredibly far removed from the brutal realities of ancient forced labor. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of dignity, recognition for every hand that toils, and the profound comfort of a world where beauty is never bought at the expense of such immense human misery, a stark contrast to the terrible truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.